Shalom everyone, Shavua Tov. Hope everyone had a beautiful Shabbat. Today, in Masechet Sanhedrin, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to review last week's learning, which was from Yudchet Amud Aleph to Chaf Amud Bet, 18a to 20b, which is 2.5 dapim, and we're going to have 5 primary sections in the learning. Bezrat Hashem, as our review begins, we'll start at the beginning of the second chapter, the second perek, Kohen Gadol Dan, towards the top of Yudchet Amud Aleph, and our learning should be as a refuah shleima, a source of merit for a quick and speedy, complete recovery for Yaakov ben Dinah. And let's get started, top of Yudchet Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, this is the beginning of the second parak, Kohen Gadol Dan v'daninoto. Kohen Gadol can act as a judge, and he is also able to be judged as a litigant. Me'iru me'idinoto. He can act as a witness, and he can also be testified against. Choletz v'chotzin le'ishto. He could perform chalitza, and his wife, upon his passing, could receive chalitza. Umiyabminet ishto. Also, his wife can receive yibum. But he cannot do yibum because by definition that means his brother would have had to pass away, and it's his brother's wife who's an almanah, which is prohibited to a Kohen Gadol. Met lo meit. Now if the Kohen Gadol loses a relative, so this is Reb Meir, he says he can't follow properly after the coffin. So Rashi explains it has to be that he's an alleyway away, which means he can't be in the line of vision with the coffin in its travel, but he could follow behind at that distance. And he only goes till the exit of the city. These are the words of Reb Meir. Vida says no, he actually does not leave the mikdash altogether, meaning to say he does not follow after the coffin in the at all. Because the pasuk says, he cannot leave the mikdash. Now, if he comes to comfort others who lost a relative, so the other comforters, when they pass by the shura, this area that the mourners were standing, so they would pass by one after the other. The appointed one, which refers to the sgan, we'll see in the Gemara, the deputy Kohen Gadol, would arrange for the Kohen Gadol to be between himself and the nation in comforting the mourners. Now, if he's being comforted by others upon a loss of his relative, so everyone says to him, we should be your atonement. He says to them, you should be blessed from heaven. And when they would give him the Sudat Havra'ah, the Sudah that was given customarily from other people after the passing of a relative, so everybody would sit on the ground, and he would recline on a bench. This was all the halachot of the Kohen Gadol. Moving on to the second part of the Mishnah. Hamelech, regarding a king, lo dan v'lo daninoto. He cannot act as a judge, nor can he be judged. Lo me'id v'lo me'idinoto. He cannot be a witness, nor can he be testified against. Lo choletz v'lo chotzinoto. Nor can he do chalitza, or his wife cannot receive chalitza either. Lo mi'abem v'lo mi'abmin li'ishto. He does not do yibum, nor is his wife going to receive yibum upon his passing. If he wants to do chalitza or yibum, he is remembered for good. We do not listen to him. He's not allowed to do yibum or chalitza. Also, his widow cannot marry somebody else. Rav Yehuda argues and says, a king can marry the widow of another king. Because we do find that David HaMelech married the widow of Shaul. How do we know? Because in Shmuel Bet, the pasuk says, Hashem tells David HaMelech, I will give you the house of your master, and the wives of your master in your embrace. So meaning to say, in your lap. So see, clearly he was able to marry the widows of Shaul. Says the Gemara, Kohen Gadol Dan, the beginning of the Mishnah said a Kohen Gadol can act as a judge. Excuse me. Pshita, this is obvious. So the Gemara says, Daninoto, it's terichal. The chidush is he can be judged. That's the chidush of the Mishnah. Hanami Pshita, this is also obvious because ilo daininanle, if he was not allowed to be judged, meaning that he wasn't allowed to be a litigant who was judged in a court case, how could he be a judge? We know the pasuk in Sefania tells us, Lakoshu. It says, analyze yourself and then analyze others. The Amr Rish Lakish explained, Shot atzmecha, first improve yourself, and then improve others. It means it's not appropriate to start criticizing others until you can criticize yourself, which means that if others can't judge him, he certainly can't judge others. So the fact that our Mishnah says he could judge means that others can judge him too. So the Gemara says two answers what the Chidush is. Really, it's just to keep the Mishnah in a universal format. Since in the Seifa of the Mishnah we're going to teach a king cannot judge or be judged, so Tananami Kohen Gadol dan v'danin. So we also taught a Kohen Gadol could judge and could be judged against. Alternatively, the second answer, HaKamash Malan, the Chidush of our Mishnah that he could be judged, is Kedetanya, based on a specific area that he could be judged, the following Braita introduces, which says, Kohen Gadol Sha'arag nefesh, if a Kohen Gadol kills somebody, B'meizid, if he kills intentionally, Ne'arag, so he's put to death in court. B'shogeg, if he kills unintentionally, Goleh, he is sent to Ir Miklat. Now he transgresses a naseh and a negative command. He's like a simple person, a regular person for every matter. That last part of the Braita, we'll see later what it means. So, of course, if he kills intentionally, he is killed. And what's the chidush in that? So the Gemara answers, This is all the second answer of the Gemara, what the chidush is in our Mishnah. The chidush of the Braita, and we'll see it back into the Mishnah too, is that if he kills somebody b'shogeg, he still goes to galut, ir miklat. So Gemara says, Hanami pshit, it's also obvious. The Gemara says, it's derich. Since it says in the pasuk, regarding someone who goes to ir miklat, vayeshev bad mota kohen gadol. We know he stays in the ir miklat if he kills b'shogeg till the death of the kohen gadol, then he returns to his place. So Ema, I might say, kol de'it letakanta b'chazara. If he has a resolution to go back when the Kohen Gadol passes away legally, so he can go to the Ir Miklat in the first place. But if he does not have that solution, lo legally, he shouldn't go in the first place. Now, since he won't have that solution because he's the Kohen Gadol himself, so it's until he dies, basically, that he's stuck there. So the Tanan, as the Mishnah tells us in Yechet Mudbet, Ha'arei Kohen Gadol, if somebody murders a Kohen Gadol, or Kohen Gadol Sha'araget HaNefesh, or Kohen Gadol himself who kills somebody, Eino Yotzei Misham Lo'olam, he never leads the Ir Miklat. So Ema, I might say, lo legally, he shouldn't go to Galut. Kamash Malan, the Chidush is, he does go to Ir Miklat. So that's the Chidush of the Braita, and that's the Chidush of our Mishnah of Daininan Lei, is that we could judge him, is that we'll send him to Galut if he kills somebody, as we explained. Asks the Gemara of Eimachinami, but maybe this logic is true. Maybe if he murders, he doesn't go to Ir Miklat. The answer is, the pasuk says, Lanus Shama Kol Rotzeach. It says anybody that murders is sent to the Ir Miklat, Fila Kohen Gadol b'mashma, which even includes a Kohen Gadol. Let's move on. Over al aseh v'alot taseh. We said in the Braita, the Kohen Gadol transgresses an aseh and a lot taseh. Now the implication is, the way we're reading it, he has to transgress an aseh and a lot taseh. So the Gemara says, Lo sagi de lo avar, is it impossible for him to not transgress? What do you mean he's for sure going to transgress? So Achi Kalmar, the Gemara says, this is what the Braita means to say. Im avar l'aseh v'alot taseh, hareu kehajiot. It means, if a Kohen Gadol does something that's not a capital punishment, something that would require for a normal person a court of 3, so he's adjudicated, he'll get malkot for transgressing, makot mardut we call it, for transgressing an aseh, or malkot for a lot aseh, in a court of 3 like a normal person. That's the idea. So the Gemara says, means he's adjudicated in a court of 3. Pshita asks the Gemara, that's also obvious. The Gemara says, no. The Chidush is, we learned on Betamud Aleph, ein danin lo et hashevet velo et navi sheker velo et kohen gadol el al pi beit din shel 71. We know when it comes to capital cases, the Kohen Gadol is judged by a court of 71. V'amar Avada bar Ahava, and this is deduced from the pasuk kol hadavar gadol yaviu elecha. That when it says, Yitro tells Moshe, all of the great things we brought to you, the way we expound the pasuk, there's machloket there, but he expounded, and our Mishnah holds, Dvarav shel gadol. It means matters of the great one, meaning the Kohen Gadol, his capital punishment is adjudicated by a court of 71, unlike others who is in the court of 23. So Ema, you might say, Kol Dvarav shel gadol, that it includes all matters of the Kohen Gadol, even non-capital punishments have to be adjudicated in a court of 71. Kamash Malan, that's the Chidush. If it's non-capital, he's like a Hajjot, even a court of 3. Maybe you'll say that is true. So the Gemara answers, Michtiv Divrei Gadol, doesn't say matters of the Great One, which would include even non-capital things. Rather, Hadavar Gadol Chtiv, it means only severe things or greater things. Davar gadol mamash, it really means only if it's something that is severe, like a capital case, that will be adjudicated by a court of 3, but like a court of 71, but non-capital will be adjudicated by a court of 3. Continues the Mishnah. It said, Me'idu me'idinoto, that the Kohen Gadol could testify and he could be testified against. So Me'id, the Gemara says, how do we know, how is it that he's allowed to testify? Vatani, but a Braita teaches us, Vehitalamta, it says in the Pasuk regarding a Shavat Aveda. So it says, you're not allowed to avert your gaze if you see something lost. And it emphasizes Vehitalamta, which we understand means there are times that you could avert your gaze. Pa'amim she'ata mitalem, u'pa'amim she'iata mitalem. So what are the times you're allowed to avert your gaze? HaKetzad, Kohen v'hu beveit hakvarot. If it's a Kohen and he sees the lost object of someone else in the cemetery, so it's asur for him to go and to become tameh. Or zaken ve'ena lefichvodo, if it's an elder person and it would be disrespectful for him to carry it around. Or shaita melacha shelo meruba mishel chavero, or he has a job that pays so much that if he'd return it, the recipient of this aveda would have to pay him back, which would be far more than what this aveda is worth. Therefore, the pasuk says there are times you're actually allowed to not return. But the point of the kasha is, you see, there are times when it's not respectful and you don't have to fulfill the mitzvah. So here too, how could a Kohen Gadol act as a witness? It's disrespectful for him to do it. So Rav Yosef, Me'id lemelech, it means he could testify if it's a court case involving the king. And that's considered more respectful. We learned in our Mishnah, we learned in our Mishnah that a king cannot be a judge or be adjudicated against. Lo me'id v'lo me'idinoto. He can't be a witness, nor can he be testified against. So clearly, you can't testify against the king. So how could you say he's testifying against the king? It means he can testify for the son of the king. That would be what the Kohen Gadol is allowed to do. The problem is, Ben Melech Hedyotu. The son of a king is also just like a Hedyot, so it would be disrespectful for the Kohen Gadol to do that. Ella, the Gemara answers, Me'id b'fnei HaMelech. It means he can testify in front of the king, meaning if the king is a judge, he can testify in that case. Says the Gemara, you can't have a king on the Sanhedrin. So the Gemara answers like this. Really, we're talking about where the son of the king is the litigant, and Mishum Mikara de Kohen Gadol, the honor of the Kohen Gadol, Atavi Ativ, the king will come and sit in on that case. The court will accept the testimony of the Kohen Gadol, who is testifying, again, in the presence of the king, so it's not disrespectful for the Kohen Gadol. Kai, then he would get up, Huvazil, and leave, means the king would leave, and then we would analyze his judgment, the case, the outcome of the case. Now, Gufa, the Gufa we quoted above, that a king can't be part of the Sanhedrin, and both the king and Kohen Gadol cannot be involved in the calculations of the Chachamim in terms of intercalating the years. So the Gemara says like this: a Melech b'Sanhedrin, we know the king can't be part of the Sanhedrin, because it says, Lo ta'ana al riv, you cannot respond or argue al riv. And the way we expound riv is Lo ta'ana al rav. It means you can't argue on someone who's greater. So therefore, if he would be on the court, he would have to speak first because of the king, and nobody could disagree with him. That can't work. But lo melech lo kohen gadol b'ibur shana. What's the pshat? Both king and Kohen Gadol can't be involved in intercalating the year. Melech, so the king, because we would suspect Mishum Afsanya, since he would pay per year the wages of his army, and if he would have the ability to make 13 months in 1 year, it would benefit him. So we don't want him to be part of that because it looks bad. Kohen Gadol Mishum Tzina, Kohen Gadol because of the cold, because if you push off the year, so then Tishrei, when he's going to the mikvah on Yom Kippur and washing his hands and feet, it'll cause him to be too cold because it'll be farther into the month of Cheshvan, which would be colder, so therefore we don't want him to be part of that leap year discussion because he might not want to make a leap year. So from this we deduce, Shata Batar Yachazil. This is an interesting conclusion, but the fact that we're saying if the Kohen Gadol was involved, he might not want to make an extra month, because if you would, it would make it that the winter weather would affect Tishrei Yom Kippur, so it appears then that when you push off the year, the month of, in this case Tishrei, would take on the weather that would have been in the year other than the intercalation. So Shata, the weather of the year, Batar Yarcha Azil, follows what the year would have been. Eini, is that true? There were these 3 shepherds, herdsmen, that were standing. The rabbis overheard them talking. One of them said, if we see that the early ripening, which is the wheat, and the early planting, late planting, the wheat and the barley are sprouting together. So den hu adar, you know that this is adar, where it gets a little warmer, it's already the month of adar. The imlav, and if not, it's not sprouting yet, let den adar, it's still cold, it's still shvat. The other one was saying, Im tor b'tzfar b'tlag b'telig yamut. If in the morning the ox is going to die because of the cold, and it's exaggeration, but because of it, it's so cold. And in the afternoon, in the shade of the fig tree, it dozes. Ishlach mashchen, it wants to remove its skin, meaning it's so hot outside. Dein hu adar, so this is adar, because you know it's already getting hot. The imla, but if not, late dein adar, it's not considered adar, it's still shvat. And the third one was saying, im kidam takif lachadayeh, if the eastern wind is blowing very fiercely, yipach beloech, napik likivle, and he blows out his cheeks, means he blows out hot air, and it goes to greet it, meaning it's able to overpower the fierce cold wind that's blowing. Deinu adar, so you know it's not still so cold. It's adar. The imlav let dein adar, if not, it's not adar, if it's still so cold. So the point is, they overheard this conversation. They understood the implication is that since it's still cold, it's still Shvat, and they have to make a leap year to make an extra adar. Or it should be Shvat, we should say. They made a leap year. So the kasha is, the leap year then made it go back into seasons like it was meant to be, which means the next season, the weather was as if it was Adar Sheni, and not as if it was Nisan, but rather it was warm like Adar. So you see, intercalating the year actually lines it up with the months as it's meant to be. The weather reflects the month as it is now, not as it was before. Kasha. So the Gemara says back, the rabbis listened and made a leap year. The Gemara answers, V'tizbra is logical, Rabbanan Arvata Samuch, where the rabbis rely on herdsmen. They don't make decisions, they rely on their own calculation. It happens to be the Roi Bakar corroborated what they were doing. Now really it's important to note over here, as Tosafot explains, is that there are times when adding on an extra month, when it's not because of the seasons, would actually put it out of season. Meaning is that it'll be cold, for example, in Tishrei like Cheshvan, which will be when they intercalate for the other reasons other than lining up the seasons. But if it's to put it back into seasons, so for example, Pesach is in the Aviv, in the spring, or Tishrei is in the autumn, so then it would line it back up, and that was probably what was reflected in the story with the three herdsmen. Continues the Gemara, Choletz v'choltzin, we said in the Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol could do chalitza, and his wife can receive chalitza, but he cannot do yibum. He cannot do eno miyabim. He cannot do... he can't do yibum, he said, because it would be marrying an almana, and a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. Says the Gemara, kapasik vetani. So the Mishnah doesn't make a distinction, it just states unequivocally, lo shnami na erosin, lo shnami na nesuin. Whether his brother passed away after erosin, or even nesuin, regardless, he can't do yibum. So bish shnami na nesuin, whether it's from nesuin, I understand, have aseh velo taseh. So you have a mitzvat aseh of yibum. On the other hand, you have a mitzvat aseh, he has to marry a betula, which from the Nisuin, she's not. And also there's an Isur for him to marry an Almanah. So the Aseh of Yibum will not override the Mitzvat Aseh and Lo Taseh of marrying this woman, of doing Yibum. Turning to Yitet Mud Aleph. Ve'en Aseh doche Lo Taseh ve'Aseh. Aseh doesn't override Lo Taseh and Aseh. Elamina Erosin Amai. But what's the reason from Erosin he can't do Yibum? Yavo Aseh. We have a principle that the Aseh can come of Yibum in this case. The Yitche Lo Taseh and push off the Lo Taseh. She's still a Betula. So it should push off the lo tasev almanan. Should be allowed to do yibum. So the Gemara answers really midoraita he could, but gzeira biyarishona etu biyashniya. It's a gzeira because if he does yibum, then he might continue to live with her in the future relations. Doesn't have a mitzvah of yibum associated with it. So then he'd just be transgressing the lo taseh of being with an almanah. Tani nami hachi, the Braita supports this. Im kadmu ba'alu biyarishona kanu. If he had relations with her first time, he actually acquires her. The yibum is effective. But it's prohibited from to keep her for the second relations because that would only be a lo taseh of marrying an almanah. Continues the Gemara, met lo met. We said in the Mishnah that Reb Meir's position was that he can go out not being seen in the line of vision along with the coffin of the relative who passed away. So it says in the pasuk, he's not allowed to leave the mikdash. Lo yetzei mahan, he can't go out with them. But he can follow after them. Kate said, how is this? Again, he stays a distance away that he's not seen the line of vision. They go into the alleyway, he stays in the previous one. And we said he can go till the entrance of the city. And Rabbi Yehuda argued, he said, no. that Min HaMikdash Lo Yetzeh is literal, and therefore he can't go out after the coffin at all. So Shaper Kamar Rabbi Yehuda has a good argument. How does Rav Meir respond to the pasuk? So Amar Lecha Rav Meir says back, if you take the pasuk literally, Hachi lebeito nami lo, he can't even go to his house. Of course he could go to his house. So you can't take the pasuk literal that it means Min HaMikdash Lo Yetzeh. Elachi Kamar, the pshat in the pasuk is Min HaMikdash Lo Yetzeh Mikdushato Lo Yetzeh. He can't leave his status of kedusha. V'kivan de'it le'akera, since there's a distinctive factor that he's so far behind, Lo ati leminga, he's not going to touch the coffin. Rabbi Yehuda says back, Agav mararei dilma makri v'ati v'naga. Since he's so embittered because of the loss, he might touch the coffin. That's why he can't even follow after it as a safeguard. Now, the Mishnah told us, Kishum Menachem, when he comforts others, so he would pass by with his sgan, with his mumunah on his side, sandwiching him between the people who are comforting the mourners and himself. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita, Kishuhu over b'shura, when the Kohen Gadol passes the line of the mourners, lenachem et achirim, to comfort others, sgan u'mashuach she'avar b'yamino. So the sgan, which is the mimuneh, the deputy Kohen Gadol, mashuach she'avar, which is the Kohen Gadol who used to be the sgan, who took him over when he was out, and then became what's called mashuach she'avar, which is a higher level. He's like a Kohen Gadol, he's just not doing the service. So they're both on the right of the Kohen Gadol. V'rosh beit av, and the head of the family of Kohanim who are serving that day, va'avelim, and also the mourners, and the rest of the nation, mismolo, is on the left of the Kohen Gadol. Now, when the Kohen Gadol himself lost somebody, a relative, and he's standing in the row, he's being comforted by others, sgan miyamino, so the sgan, the deputy, is on his right, and everyone else is on his left. But the mashuach, meaning the one who had taken him over in his absence, wouldn't come to greet him. My time, what's the reason for that? Because since there's a natural contention between them, he might think he's making fun of him, which would be, or celebrating his loss, chas v'shalom, so it's better he doesn't come. We see three halachot from this Braita. Number one, Shma mina hainu skan, hainu mimunes. We see skan and mimunes is the same person, the deputy Kohen Gadol. We also see Avelim omdim v'chol ha'am ovrim, that the halacha is that the mourner stands still and the comforters walk past. We also see Avelim l'smol ha'menachamim hen omdim, that the mourners would stand, Avelim l'smol ha'menachamim hen omdim, right, that the mourners would stand to the left of the comforters. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita Barishona yu Avelim omdim v'chol ha'am ovrim. It used to be that the mourners would stand still and the comforters would pass by them. There's two families in Yerushalayim that started to fight. Each one said they wanted to pass by the mourners first. So they established that the halacha should be that the nation should stand still and the mourners would pass by them. So first of all, he's saying three halachot that Rabbi Yossi instituted. Number one, he returned the halacha back to how it was in Tzipori, is that the mourner should stand still and the nation should pass by, the comforters. Number two, a woman should not walk with her child behind her in the market, because of a story that was, which Rashi elaborates on, that these thieves kidnapped the son and eventually coaxed her into coming after them, and then they abused her, so that she should always have the child in front, she could keep her eyes on the child. And three, is that women go out to the bathrooms back in the day, which were out in the fields. Men could walk in, it would be an issue of yichud, because a man and two women is yichud. They should talk, even though they're not supposed to in the bathroom usually, to prevent that issue. She'ilit et Rabbi Yoshia Rabba bebeit ilmin. I asked Rabbi Yoshia Rabba in the cemetery, to Hutzelav Hutzelav. Amrali, and he said to me the following halachot. He said, number one, Ein shura pchuta me'asara b'nei adam ve'en avelim min ha'minyan. In order for it to be a proper shura, you have to have 10 people there of mourners, of comforters, because the mourners don't participate in that. And two, bein sha'avilim omdin v'chol ha'am ovrin, bein sha'avilim ovrin v'chol ha'am omdin means either custom, whether the mourners stand still or the comforters stand still, is acceptable. We said in the Mishnah, when the Kohen Gadol would be comforted, so we said what would happen. So the Gemara wonders the following. When he comforts others, what does he tell them? So Tashma, the Gemara says the Braita. Let's see the Braita. It says, he would say to others, be comforted. So what's the case? If it's when others are comforting him, so is he going to tell them, be comforted? Does he want to speak a negative, a curse against them, meaning to say is saying be comforted. Chas v'shalom is to say you should also experience loss and need comfort. Obviously it means it means when he comforts others because they experience the loss, he says be comforted. That's the appropriate language for the Kohen Gadol to say to others when he visits them. Moving on to the second section, let's go on to the Mishnah where it discussed the king now. So the next part of the Mishnah said, Melech lo dan, he cannot judge. So Rav Yosef explains like this. Lo shanu, it's only an issue for kings to judge or be judged. Ela malchei Yisrael, the kings who came from the portion of Eretz Yisrael that was called the area of Yisrael. Aval malchei Beit David dan, but the kings of Beit David dan, they could judge v'danin atan, and they could be judged. Because it says in the pasuk in Yirmiyah, Beit David ko amar Hashem, the house of David says Hashem. Dino laboker mishpat, the judgment for the morning will be judgment. So clearly, the house of David, the Malchut Beit David of Yehuda, those kings could judge. And since we know if they couldn't be judged, how could they judge? We know the pasuk says, fix yourself and then fix others. So therefore, obviously, if they could judge, obviously others can judge them as well. So what's the reason that the kings of Israel could not judge? Because of the following story. We know that the servant of Yanai HaMelech, who was the king of Israel, killed somebody. So Amar Lahu Shimon ben Shetach was the head of the Beit Din, said to the Chachamim, Tenui Neichem bo nedunenu, judge him, figure out what to do. So Shalchu Lei, they sent a message to Yanai, Abdecha katal nafsha, your servant killed somebody. Shadrei Lahu, he sent the servant, so Yanai sent the servant to court. Shalchu Lei sent a message to Yanai, Ta'ant nami lacha, you have to come here too, because V'huad b'va'alav is that they should testify or be warned in front of the owners. Amar Torah yavo bala shor v'yamon al shoro, is the owner has to be there with his ox that killed somebody, in this case his slave. Sa'ata v'yativ, so the Yanai came. Amar le Shimon ben Shetach, Yanai HaMelech amol al raglecha, he said, Yanai, stand up on your feet, v'yeidu b'cha, and they will testify, the witnesses who saw what happened will testify against you. V'lo lefanenu ata omeid, you're not standing in front of us, a mortal court. Elifnei misha amar v'haya olam ata omeid, you're standing in front of Hashem. Amar, like it says, v'amdu shnei anashim asher lehem ariv lifnei Hashem, the witnesses testify in front of Hashem. So Amar lo, so Yanai said back to not like you say, but like your friends. So let's see what your friends think about this. Turning to Tetemud Bet. So the Gemara tells us, Nifna liyamina, Shimon Shetach turned to his right, to the other Chachamim there, and Kavshu pneim bekarka, they were scared of Yanai, so they put their faces in the earth as if they were busy thinking about something. Nifna l'smalo, Shimon Shetach turned to his left, the Kavshu pneim bekarka, again the Chachamim turned away. Amar lahen, so Shimon Shetach said, Bali machshavot atem, he said, are you so involved in your thoughts? You're just avoiding giving a clear answer that he has to stand up. Yavo bal machshavot, so Hashem who knows the real thoughts. V'yipar mikem should come and should punish you. Miyad ba Gavril v'choftan bekarka, Gavril came and he killed these chachamim to the ground, pushed them to the ground, and they passed away. Smashed them to the ground, they died. But so at that time the chachamim said, Melech lo dan v'lo danin oto, king cannot judge or be judged, lo me'id v'lo me'idin oto, he cannot testify or be testified against. Let's continue. Lo choletz v'lo chotzin b'chule, so he can't do chalitza, nor can his wife receive chalitza, which makes sense because a king's wife cannot remarry. And he says the Gemara, is this true? Is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we said in the Mishnah, a king could do yibum or chalitza. Is that true? But we know even if you hold a nasi could be mochel in his honor, melech shemachal kvodo, ein kvodo machol, but a king cannot be mochel his honor. Shenemar, like it says, som tasim alecha melech. You have to place a king on you. Shetehei mato alecha. So if he can't be mochel in his honor because he needs to keep the awe of the people on him, how according to Rabbi Yehuda could he do yibum or chalitza, which seems to be being mochel in his honor? Where I answer is mitzvah shani, for a mitzvah it's different. So we had a machloket in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said that we have a proof that David married the widows of Shaul, so a king could marry the widow of another king. Chachamim argued. Satanya, the Braita says that the Chachamim said, Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, nashim aru'uyot lo mi beit hamelech. It wasn't the wives of Shaul, but it was women who were fitting from the house of the king. Umaninu, who were they? Meirav u'Michal, the daughters of Shaul, which we'll move on to the third section and discuss. Says the Gemara, Shalu Talmidav es Rabbi Yossi, Hech nasa David shtei achayot b'chayehen. How could it be that David married two sisters in their lifetime? There's an Isur D'Oraita to marry two sisters. How did David do this? So says the Gemara, Amar Lance, Rabbi Yossi said back, Michal achar mitat Merav nasa. First he married Merav, she passed away, and then he married Michal, which is permitted. Now Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says a different pshat. He said, Kiddushay ta'ut ayulo b'merav. It was actually a mistaken and ineffective kiddushin for the first one, Merav. Shen Emra, like the pasuk says, Tenat ishti et Michal. He says to Shaul, David says to Shaul, give me my wife Michal. So it emphasizes she was my wife. Asher rasti li b'me'ar lot plishtim. That I married her with the 100 foreskins of the Plishtim, which we'll speak about in a minute. So my Talmud, what's the drasha that it was a mistake? The emphasis he was saying was, she's my wife, Michal. Velo Merav ishti, she's not. So the Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said it was effective because actually the first one's was not. My Kiddushay Taut, what was the mistake in Kiddushin? The pasuk tells, Shaul had said, whoever kills Goliath, this terrible warrior, who was blaspheming Hashem and the Jewish people, I'll make him wealthy and he'll marry my daughter. So Azal Katle, David went and killed him. Amar lo, milve itlecha gabai. So Shaul said to David that the halacha is, if you're trying to be mekadesh her, Merav, with the money that I owe you, that's a loan. Somebody tries to be married with a loan, it's not effective. So actually, she wasn't married, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So instead, Shaul gave this Merav to Adriel, a different person. Like it says, when this Merav, Bat Shaul, was given to David, and it says instead of giving to David, Shaul gave her to this Adriel. Says the Gemara, so they move forward with this. Amar le, so Shaul said to David, if you want to etin lecha Michal, that I should give you instead Michal, my second daughter, other daughter, zil aiti lemea arlot plishtim. So give me 100 foreskins of the plishtim. Is kill 100 plishtim, bring me their foreskins as a sign, and that will be the kilu, the kiddushin. So azal aiti le, so he went and brought them, no problem. So Amar le, says the Gemara, Amar le, so Shaul said to David, milveu pruta et lecha gabai. Still there's an issue, because now you have a loan, there's money I owe you, and also there's the pruta, which is these foreskins. Shaul thought milveu pruta da'atea milve, that when you have someone trying to mekudeshet with a loan and something else, a pruta, the focus is on the loan, which is ineffective. David thought milveu pruta da'atea pruta, which is actually the halacha in Masechet Kiddushin, the focus is on the pruta, and therefore it should be effective. Alternatively, the kulei milveu pruta da'atea pruta, that everybody agrees the focus is on the pruta, it should have been effective. But Shaul thought lo chazu velo midi, that this is worth nothing, the foreskins. David thought, because it could be food for dogs and cats, and therefore the Kiddushin was binding. Fine. Asks the Gemara back to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, hi, Tanat Ishtiyat Michal my darshbe. What does Rabbi Yossi learn from the pasuk of give my wife Michal? Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha learns from that only Michal was his wife, the first one was not. But Rabbi Yossi holds they were both actually married, and Merav had died, and then he married Michal. So how does he learn from this pasuk? So the Gemara says Rabbi Yossi l'tamei. Rabbi Yossi is not bothered by that because he has a clear proof that he was indeed married to Merav. The Tanya, as the Braita teaches us, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi Hayah Doresh Mikraot Muravin. Rabbi Yossi used to expound psukim that were seemingly mixed together, convoluted. Because Ketiv, the pasuk in Shmuel Bet tells, Vayikach HaMelech et Shnei Bnei Ritzpah Bat Aya. The king took the two sons of Ritzpah Bat Aya, Asher Yalda Shaul et Armoni ve'et Mephibosheth, that she had given birth for Shaul, Armoni and Mephibosheth. And the 5 sons of Michal who had given birth for her husband Adriel Amcholati. The problem is Adriel was not the husband of Michal. B'chila Adriel natna. Did Shaul give Michal to Adriel? V'alo lepalti ben Laish natna. As we'll learn later, he actually gave her over to Palti ben Laish. As the pasuk says, V'shol natanet Michal bito eshet David lepalti ben Laish v'gomer. Ella, so the reason it calls her the wife of Adriel is Makish Kiddushay Merav LaAdriel LaKiddushay Michal LaPalti. It's to compare the two marriages. Ma Kiddushay Michal LaPalti Ba'avera, just as Michal's marriage to Palti was Ba'avera, because she was indeed married to David, Af Kiddushay Merav LaAdriel Ba'avera, it was also Asur, because as Rabbi Yossi said, she was indeed married, and therefore giving her over after was actually inappropriate. Says the Gemara, Yeshua ben Karcha, Nami Yachtiv et Chamesh b'nei Michal bat Shaul. So what does Yeshua ben Karcha learn from this pasuk? Ma'alach Yeshua ben Karcha, v'chi Michal yolda, alo Merav yolda. We know Merav gave birth to these 5 children. So why does it call Michal the mother? The Gemara answers, Merav yolda, Michal gidla, because Merav gave birth to them, but Michal raised them. Therefore they're called on her name. Which teaches you a person who raises an orphan in their house, the pasuk considers it as if they gave birth to that child. Chanina kra Yochanan v'ishto Elazar v'Geula u'Shmuel b'limudei siman. So the Gemara continues on this same note. Rabbi Chanina Omer Mehachar. Rabbi Chanina says you have proof from Megillat Ruth. The same idea, if you raise an orphan, it's as if they're called on your name. It's like you gave birth to them. It's vatikrena lo hashchenot shem lemor yulad ben lenaami. It says they called the child, the neighbors called the child the name, saying a child has been born for Naami. Naami yalda, Naami was the mother-in-law. V'halo Ruth yalda, really actually Ruth was the mother. She gave birth to the child. Ella Ruth Yalda v'Naami Gidla v'Naami raised the child. The Figach Nikra Shema is called on her name. Rabbi Yochanan Mechaber says a similar proof. It says regarding Kalev, who was married to Bitya, who was the daughter of Paro, who had converted. V'Ishtoa Yehudit. It says in Devrei Yamim, his wife was Yehudit, or Yehudiya is another girsa. V'Yaldat Yared Avigdor, she gave birth to all these different references to Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says, Eila b'nei Bitya bat Paro asher lakach Mered. These are the sons of Bitya bat Paro, who was taken to Mered, which was Kalev. Mered's at Kalev. Mered refers to Kalev. V'lama nekashmo Mered. Why was he called Mered? Shemarad ba'atzat Meraglim. Because Kalev rebelled against the advice of the Meraglim. He didn't engage in their bad plots. Bitya Yalda, but did Bitya really give birth to Moshe? V'alo Yocheved Yalda. Yocheved was Moshe's mother. Yocheved Yalda, Bitya Gidla. Yocheved gave birth to Moshe, but Bitya raised him. V'fikach Nikra Shema, so he is called on her name. Rabbi Lazar Amar Mehach. Rabbi Lazar says we have another source. Pasuk in Tehillim, it says, Ga'alta b'zracha amecha, you redeem with your strength your nation. B'nei Yaakov Yosef Sela, the sons of Yaakov and Yosef for eternity. V'chi Yosef Yalad, did Yosef give birth to the Jewish people? V'alo Yaakov Yalad, Yaakov is really the father of the Jewish people. V'alo Yaakov Yalad, Yosef Kilkel, Yosef provided them with sustenance in Mitzrayim. V'fi Nikra Shmo, therefore they're called on his name. Amar Bishmo bar Nachmin Rabbi Yonatan, similar idea. Kol melamed ben chaverot Torah, ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu yaldo. Anybody that teaches the son of his friend Torah, the pasuk considers it as if he gave birth to that child. Shenemar, when it talks about the children of Aaron and Moshe, it says Ve'ela toldot Aaron and Moshe. These are the children of Aaron and Moshe. And then it says Ve'ela shmo b'nei Aaron. It only lists the sons of Aaron. Lo'omer lecha, to teach you, Aaron Yalad, Moshe Limed. Aaron gave birth to these children, but Moshe taught them Torah. The figure Nikra Shmo, therefore they're called on his name. Lachen ko amar Hashem el Beit Yaakov asher pada et Avraham. So a similar drasha, it says Hashem called to the house of Yaakov that redeemed Avraham. So what does it mean? How do we know? Where do we see that Yaakov redeemed Avraham? He redeemed him from the suffering of raising children. Because Yaakov took all of that suffering and Avraham Avinu didn't have to deal with it. Like it says in Yeshaya, Lo ata yevosh Yaakov, you will not be embarrassed, Yaakov. Lo ata yevosh Yaakov me'aviv, you will not be embarrassed from your father Yitzchak. V'lo ata panav yechveru me'avi aviv, nor will your face turn white, be embarrassed from Avraham Avinu, your grandfather, because you took that suffering that was actually attributable to him. Now back to the story here with David. We know this fellow who Michal was given over to was called Palti. It says that in Shmuel Aleph, Paltiel, but also calls him Paltiel in Shmuel Bet. So Amar Rav Yochanan, why does it do that? Because Palti, Shmuel's name was actually Palti. Why was it called Paltiel? Hashem prevented him from doing Aveira. Masa, what did Palti do to prevent sleeping with Michal, who was actually given to him but wasn't his wife because she was married to David? He stuck a sword between him and her, and he said, Amar, is anybody that's involved in this, in relations with Asur, will be stabbed by this sword. The Gemara says, did he not have relations? But it says, when David ultimately takes her back, it says, her husband went with her, implying that they had relations. So the Gemara answers, it means he took care of her like a husband, he cared for her like a husband, but not that they had relations. It says he was going and crying. So the Gemara answers, which seems to be that they had relations. So the Gemara answers, "Ala mitzvah da'azil mineh," which is unbelievable, is because he realized the mitzvah that he was losing about being kovesh et yitzro. That's what he was crying about. It says ad bachurim, until bachurim. What does that teach us? Shenasu shneim kebachurim shelo ta'amu ta'amchet. They were both like young men that they hadn't tasted sin, meaning that they were pure. They never had relations to be isur. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, continuing with his palti fellow, Tokva shel Yosef. The great deed of Yosef, which was that he didn't sleep with Eshet Potifar, and Vitanuto shel Boaz, was considered insignificant in relations to what Boaz accomplished. As we'll see, he didn't have relations with Ruth. Tokvo shel Boaz, and the strength of Boaz was in Vitanuto shel Palti ben Laish, was considered insignificant in the face of what Palti ben Laish accomplished. Tokva shel Yosef in Vatanuto shel Boaz. Why was Boaz so much greater? Because it says, it says, he woke up and he was scared. Now, what does that mean? Because Ruth was in the bed. It says, Amar Rav shenaseh b'saro kirashe liftot, is that his flesh became like the tips of terms. Means he became aroused, actually, when he saw that she was there. And Rashi explains, she was also a penuya, so she was muteret to him, she was permitted to him. Nonetheless, he refrained from having relations with her because it wouldn't have been appropriate. So that was considered even greater than what Yosef did, because Yosef was with Eshet Potifar, who was married, and there was more of a risk factor associated with it. Turn to Chaf Amud Aleph. Tokvo shel Boaz in Vatanuto shel Palti ben Laish, and the greatness of Boaz was like it was insignificant in the face of Palti ben Laish. Kedamar, as we explained, because he was with her for many years and still he didn't have relations with her. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, what it says in the pasuk in Mishlei, the end of Mishlei. We say this every Friday night. Eshet Chayil. We say Rabot banot asu Chayil. Many girls made a valiant war. Ve'at alit al kulana, but you are greater than all of them. So Rabot banot asu Chayil ze Yosef Boaz refers to the accomplishment of overcoming their yetzer, which was of Yosef and Boaz. Ve'at alit al kulana, but you are greater than all of them. Ze Palti ben Laish, as we explained, was the deeds of Palti ben Laish. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, my dechtiv, what does it say? Sheker achen ve'evela yofi. False is grace, and vain or nothingness is the beauty. Sheker achen ze Yosef, it refers to Yosef, how he put aside his yetzer and he overcame it. Ve'evela yofi ze Boaz. Yirat Hashem iti talal ze Palti ben Laish. So a similar idea to before. Davar achen, another pshat. Sheker achen ze doro shel Moshe. Now this isn't in terms of overcoming yetzer as much as the greatness in Torah study. So the Sheker achen refers to the generation of Moshe's greatness in Torah study. His generation was great in Torah. Vehevela yofi ze doro shel Yoshua, the generation of Yoshua. Yirat Hashem iti talal ze doro shel Chizkiah. Rashi says the generation of Chizkiah was even greater. He brought everyone back to Torah study that you couldn't find an Amma Aretz between Beersheva and Midan Ba'ad Beersheva. Unbelievable. Davar Acher, another pshat. Sheker achen ze doro shel Moshe v'Yoshua. Vehevela yofi ze doro shel Chizkiah. Yirat Hashem iti talal ze doro shel Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi. This refers to the generation of Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi. It was greater than all of them in Torah. Amru alav al Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi. They said about his generation, ayu shisha talmidim mitkasin b'talit tachat v'oskim b'Torah. They were very poor. So you had six students, covered in one garment, and they were still involved in Torah. That showed their passion and their dedication to Torah study. That was even greater than Moshe, Yoshua, and Chizkiah's generations. Final section. Mishnah now moves on to discuss the passing of a relative of a king. Meit lo meit. If a king loses a relative, he can't leave his palace. Rabbi Yehuda Mary argues, he could follow after the coffin. That after Avner, who was the old general of Shaul, who had made peace with David and then was killed by David's general Yoav, David followed after the coffin. Like it says, David followed after the coffin, and it was like a relative of his because he was a Talmid Chacham. So Amar Lei said to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not a proof. He needed to do that to comfort the people, to quell a rebellion, but really it wouldn't be permitted. Now, when they give the king the first meal after the burial, everybody sits in the ground. He sits on a dargish, which we'll see ultimately in the Gemara is a sort of bed with a leather base, a leather covering, which was a little bit of a higher level than a safsal, like the Kohen Gadol, seemingly for his honor. Says the Gemara Tan Rabbanan, says the Braita, if the minhag was in that place for the women to follow behind the coffin, yotzot, that's fine. If the custom was in front of the coffin, yotzot, that's also fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, women go in front of the coffin, because David went behind the coffin of Avner. Obviously, the women were in the front. Like it says, David went after the coffin. The Chachamim said back, that was only to comfort the people. He switched off between the women and the men to comfort everybody, to appease them, so they don't think that he had an intent in killing Avner. Like it says, everybody knew that he didn't want to kill Avner. Darash Rav expounded. What does it mean when it says in the pasuk? Everyone came to comfort, or to give the king food. So ktiv la'acharot. Now it's not clear exactly why the Gemara does this, but meaning on the side they say that it doesn't actually say this, but it's written la'acharot. Maybe it could be read la'acharot, which is to cut him down. But karin la'avrot, but we read it is to give him food. So batchila la'acharoto, lebesof la'avroto. Initially they had negative intent against him. They thought he had nefarious intent against Avner, and then afterwards they recognized that he was innocent, and they comforted him and gave him food. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Neiman enash Avner. Why was Avner punished in this way? When Shaul wanted the city of the Kohanim of Nov to be killed, Avner should have protested, and he didn't. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Rabbi Yitzchak says it differently. He says, Micha v'lo nen. Actually, he did protest, but Shaul didn't listen to what he had to say. It says the Gemara, both of these shitot come from the same verse. It says after Avner's death, it says Avner, the king lamented about Avner. Vayomer, he said, Akimot naval yamut Avner, like a lowly person was Avner killed. Yadecha lo asirot, your hands were not bound. V'raglecha lo nechoshtayim hugashu, and your feet were not chained. Manda Amar Lo Micha, so the one who says, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav said he didn't protest. Hachika Amar, so what David was saying was, Yadecha lo asirot raglecha lo nechoshtayim hugashu, you weren't bound, meaning you had the opportunity to protest, and Shaul would have listened to you because he held you in high esteem. My time lo machita, so why didn't you protest? That's why you ended up falling in front of the wicked people. But according to Rabbi Yitzchak, who says he protested, he wasn't answered, so it's mahuye. Actually, David was asking in wonder, how could he die like a lowly person? Meaning, your hands were not bound, your feet were not chained, meaning you did protest. You did protest. So why did you fall in such a lowly way? So the Gemara says, okay, but Lamanda Amar Micha, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, who says he did protest, why was he punished? Because he had appointed Ishboshet, and he lasted for 2 years and another half a year until David was able to take over power. So since Avner appointed that other king after Shaul in place of David, he was punished for that reason. Okay, final point here. We said the king would sit on a dargish and the nation would sit around him on the ground. So my dargish, what is this dargish? Amar Ula Arsu Degada, it's a good luck bed. Rashi says they used to set up a bed and a table in the house that wasn't slept and wasn't used for good luck of the house. So says the Gemara, this doesn't work. The Rabbanan turned to Ula and they said like this, is there something? Until they wouldn't sit on it. Now he's going to sit on it. So Matgif Rava says back, what kind of a question is that? Until now, he wouldn't take food from others. Now he is. So maybe it's the same thing. Until now, they wouldn't sit on this bed. And now they're sitting on this bed. If you have a question, hakasha, this could be a question. Dargish tzarich lichvoto ela zokfo. We know that the halacha is, the Braita teaches that when someone passes away, they would turn over the beds in the house. But it says that the dargish was stood up, it wasn't turned over. The isal kadatach, and if it enters your mind, arsa degad, it's a good luck, but amayin tzarich lichvoto, it's a regular bed essentially. Why don't you have to turn it over? Vatanya, the Braita teaches, hakofet mitato lo mitato bilvado kofeh, lekol mitot sheyesh lo betoch beito kofeh. It's turned over all the beds in the house. My question, what's your problem? It's just like a bed that's used for designation for putting items on it. Tekatani, as the Braita teaches, you don't turn that over. So this is used also for good luck. You don't have to turn it over. If you want to ask a kasha on Ula, this would be the question. Rav Shimon Gamliel says you don't stand it up the dargish, but for a mourner. Rather, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, dargish matir karvitin v'hu nafel me'elav. You loosen the loops that hold the base of the bed, and it falls by itself. But if it's a good luck bed, it wouldn't have these loops. So that can't be the pshat. Amar Liah Humer Rabban Ravin came, he said, one of the rabbis told me, Rav Tachlif Shmer, Rav Tachlif was his name, who was in the leather market, usually. Amar Liah, and he said to him, my dargish, what is dargish? And he explained, Arsa Ditzala, it is a leather bed, means it's a piece of leather stretched taut over a frame. That was a dargish, Arsa Ditzala. And Rashi explains over here, that's what the machloket really is, Tanakam Rishon Gamliel, is that to turn it over, since there weren't poles coming out of the top of it, the leather would be touching the ground and would get ruined. So therefore, either you stand it up, or according to Rishon Gamliel, you just loosen and it falls. It doesn't get ruined though, because the top of it won't touch the ground, unlike other beds. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, Dargesh, turning to Chaf Amud Bet. The difference in Dargesh and Mita is Dargesh Sirugo Mitocha, the knots are inside of the wood frame, and Mita Sirugo Mi'al Gaba, Mita, the knots that they would tie the strings, the ends of the mattress, would be over the frame. The Gemara says it can't be because the Braita teaches, it's a Mishnah in Kelim, it says, what is the conclusion of the process of wooden vessels that they become able to become tameh? Hamita varisa, a bed or a crib, mishi yeshufem or a dag. When you rub it with the skin of the fish, it was like a sandpaper. But the Gemara says, but if the bed, the ropes are tied over the frame, so lamale shifat or a dag, you don't even come in contact with the frame. So what would be the purpose of smoothing it out? Rather, both of them are inside of the frame. When it comes to a bed, it was put through and taken out of the outside of the frame. And the dargish, there were loops attached to the frame, and then the ends of the mattress were tied into those loops. That's the distinction between them. Not that you stand up the dargish for the mourner, but rather you loosen the loops and it falls to the ground. If you have a two-poster bed where you can't turn it over because there's two posts coming out from the middle of the top and bottom of the bed, Zokfa Vadayo, he turns it on, he stands it up erect, and that's sufficient for fulfilling Kvitat Amitav, turning it over. We're stopping here. Towards the top of Chaf Amud Bet at the Mishnah. Bezrat Hashem will pick up tomorrow with this new Mishnah at Chaf Amud Bet. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day.